She knew it was over the moment she heard him laugh through the closed door. Not the laugh she recognized from 17 years of marriage, the one that surfaced during bad movies or when their daughter told elaborate lies about homework, but something lighter, unguarded, the kind of sound that only emerges when someone believes they are alone. The hallway stretched longer than it had that morning. The baseboards needed repainting. She'd been meaning to mention it for weeks. Now she stood there holding a basket of folded laundry, listening to her husband speak to someone as if the walls between them weren't paper thin, as if she couldn't hear every inflection that made him sound like a stranger. His voice dropped lower. She couldn't make out words, only rhythm, a question, a pause, another soft laugh that landed wrong in her chest. The laundry basket pressed cold wicker patterns into her palms. This isn't fiction. This is how love disappears, one small truth at a time. They'd chosen the lawyer together on a Tuesday afternoon in March, sitting side by side in an office that smelled like furniture polish and old paper. Estate planning, they'd agreed. Something responsible people did when they turned 40 and realized mortality wasn't theoretical anymore. David had found him. Marcus Reeves, a family law attorney who specialized in trusts and wills. He came highly recommended, David said, scrolling through his phone at breakfast. We should get this done, for Maya's sake. She'd nodded, stirring cream into coffee that had already gone lukewarm. Their daughter was 15, old enough to need protection from the bureaucratic aftermath of tragedy, young enough to still believe her parents were permanent fixtures, immovable as furniture. The consultation lasted 90 minutes. They answered questions about assets, beneficiaries, healthcare directives. Marcus Reeves wore a blue tie and took notes on a yellow legal pad, his handwriting slanted and efficient. He explained trusts in language that sounded both complex and reassuring, the way dentists describe root canals. I'll draw up the documents, he'd said at the end, shaking both their hands. We'll schedule a follow-up in 2 weeks to review everything. David had squeezed her hand in the parking lot afterward. See? Not so painful. The March sun felt thin and unconvincing. She'd smiled, said something about needing groceries, and they'd driven home in comfortable silence. The kind of quiet that 17 years builds between two people who've stopped needing constant conversation. That was when everything still made sense. When the story they told themselves about their lives matched the one they were living. The first call came 3 days later. She was unloading the dishwasher when David's phone buzzed on the counter. She glanced at it automatically, the way anyone does when a screen lights up nearby, and saw Marcus Reeves' name before David swept the phone away. I should take this, he said, already moving toward the hallway. She placed a coffee mug in the cabinet, closed the door, listened to his footsteps retreat toward the bedroom, the soft click of the door shutting behind him. 15 minutes later, he emerged, looking unchanged. Just some questions about the trust structure, he said, opening the refrigerator. Nothing urgent, she nodded, wiping down the counter. The dish soap left faint streaks across the granite that caught the overhead light. Did you remember to pick up Maya from practice? She asked. Shit. He grabbed his keys. I'm going now. The door closed. The house settled into its afternoon stillness, that specific quiet that exists between 3 and 5 when sunlight slants through windows at an angle that makes dust visible in the air. She finished the dishes, started dinner, forgot about the phone call entirely until the next one came 2 days later. By the time the leaves changed, she'd stopped counting. The calls arrived irregularly, sometimes in the late afternoon, sometimes after dinner, when she was helping Maya with calculus homework. Always, David would glance at his phone, excuse himself, and disappear into another room. The bedroom, his office. Once, inexplicably, the garage. Marcus again? She asked one evening, keeping her voice light. Yeah. Apparently estate law is more complicated than it looks. He smiled, but it landed slightly off-center, like a picture hung without a level. She didn't press. 17 years had taught her when to ask questions and when to trust the architecture of routine, and the routine held. David still made coffee every morning, still kissed her goodbye at the front door, still asked about her day over dinner. They still split household tasks with the unspoken efficiency of longtime partners. They still reached for each other in bed sometimes, though less frequently than before, in that gradual way desire softens into companionship. But something had shifted in the quality of his attention. He was present but slightly elsewhere, like someone listening to a distant song only they could hear. She told herself it was work stress. His firm had been difficult lately. Budget cuts, difficult clients, the usual corporate erosion that wore people down incrementally. She told herself it was midlife restlessness, that quiet panic that arrives when you're closer to the end than the beginning and haven't accomplished everything you imagined at 25. She told herself many things that autumn. The truth lived in smaller observations, the way he tilted his phone screen away from her now, even when showing her something innocuous, the way he'd started running errands alone, grocery shopping, pharmacy runs, tasks they'd always shared, the way he'd purchased a second charging cable for his car without mentioning it. Objects became a language she hadn't learned to read yet. The first time she heard him laugh through the closed door, she was carrying laundry past the bedroom. The sound stopped her mid-step. Not because it was wrong, but because it was so unexpectedly right. Unguarded and genuine in a way she hadn't heard in months. Years, maybe. She stood in the hallway, listening. His voice rose and fell in that particular rhythm that indicates storytelling. A pause. The laugh again, softer this time. Then words she almost caught. I know, you're right. The tone was intimate, confessional. The way people speak when they trust the person on the other end completely. Something cold moved through her chest. She walked past the door, carried the laundry upstairs, folded it mechanically, matched socks, smoothed t-shirts. Her hands moved through familiar motions while her mind circled the same question. Who makes you laugh like that? When he emerged 20 minutes later, his expression was carefully neutral. Everything okay? She asked. Fine. Just Marcus with more questions. He poured himself water from the kitchen tap. This process is taking forever. She watched him drink, watched him set the glass in the sink, watched him check his phone again, the screen reflecting blue light across his features. It's been 6 months, she said quietly. Don't these things usually move faster? He looked up, and for just a second, something flickered across his face. Guilt, or surprise, or calculation. It passed too quickly to name. These trusts are complicated. We want to get it right. The ceiling fan hummed above them. The refrigerator clicked through its cycle. Normal sounds in a normal kitchen where nothing felt normal anymore. Right, she said. She started paying attention differently after that. Not investigating. Not yet, just noticing. The way he'd begun scheduling haircuts more frequently. The way he'd switched from drugstore shampoo to something with bergamot that left a different scent in the bathroom. The way he'd joined a gym and started leaving for early morning workouts, returning home, showered and cheerful, in a way that felt performed. Small changes, the kind that could be explained away individually but formed a pattern when assembled together, like those magic eye posters from the 90s that resolved into 3-dimensional images if you stared long enough. She didn't say anything. What would she say? You smell different? You laugh on the phone now? You've become someone I recognize but don't quite know? Instead, she watched and waited and felt something fragile beginning to calcify inside her chest. Maya noticed before she did. Or maybe Maya had always noticed. Teenagers see more than adults give them credit for, especially when adults are trying hard to appear normal. Are you and Dad fighting? Maya asked one evening, sprawled across the living room sofa with her phone. No, honey. Wow. I don't know. You're both being weird. Weird how? Maya shrugged without looking up from her screen. Just weird, like your roommates or something. The observation landed with unexpected precision, because that's exactly what they'd become. 2 people sharing space but occupying separate orbits, intersecting only at necessary points of contact. We're fine, she said, and the lie tasted like stale coffee. Maya scrolled through her phone and said nothing more. The receipts appeared in December. She wasn't snooping, not technically. She was cleaning out the car before their annual trip to her parents' house for Christmas, finding old coffee cups and forgotten permission slips wedged into door pockets and under floor mats. The receipt was folded in thirds, tucked into the center console. Lucia's, a wine bar downtown. 2 glasses of Malbec. 1 appetizer plate. 67.43. Date, November 18th, Tuesday. The night he'd texted saying he'd be home late, dealing with a difficult client. She sat in the driver's seat, holding the paper, watching it tremble slightly in her hands. One receipt proved nothing. People met clients at wine bars. Colleagues grabbed drinks after work. There were 1,000 innocent explanations. But then there was the second receipt. This one from a coffee shop she didn't recognize, dated 3 weeks earlier, and a third from a restaurant they'd never been to together. She photographed each one with her phone, though she couldn't have explained why. Evidence felt too accusatory, documentation felt too final. She was just preserving questions she wasn't ready to ask aloud. The car smelled like his bergamot shampoo and something else, a perfume she didn't wear. Light, floral, present enough to notice, faint enough to doubt. She closed the console and went inside where David was helping Maya pack for the trip, his voice warm and paternal as he reminded her to bring chargers and extra socks. He looked up when she entered. Car all cleaned out? Yes. You okay? You look pale. Just tired. He crossed the room and pressed his palm against her forehead in that automatic gesture of concern married people develop. His hand felt warm and familiar and foreign all at once. No fever, he said. Maybe you're coming down with something. Maybe. But she wasn't sick. She was waking up. Christmas passed in a fog of forced normalcy. They drove to Connecticut, stayed in her childhood bedroom with its outdated floral wallpaper, exchanged presents around a tree that shed needles onto her mother's carpet. David charmed her parents the way he always did, helping with dishes, asking her father about his golf game, complimenting her mother's cooking. He was good at this. He'd always been good at performing the role of ideal son-in-law, ideal husband, ideal father. She'd fallen in love with that competence once. His ability to move through social situations with ease, to make people comfortable, to say the right thing at the right time. Now she wondered if all of it was performance, if she'd ever seen the person beneath the careful presentation. On Christmas Eve, his phone buzzed during dinner. He glanced at it, smiled slightly, and tucked it back into his pocket without responding. Who was that? Her mother asked innocently. Just work, but it was 8 o'clock on Christmas Eve. No one worked on Christmas Eve. No one except people with secrets that couldn't wait until morning. The confrontation came on a Thursday in January, in their kitchen, over nothing. She'd asked him to stop at the store on his way home. He'd forgotten, again. It was the third time that week, and something in her simply fractured. Where do you go? She asked. He was hanging his coat in the closet, back turned. What? When you say you're running errands, when you take calls in the other room, when you forget the milk and come home an hour late, where do you actually go? He turned slowly. His face arranged itself into confusion, but his eyes knew exactly what she was asking. I don't know what you mean. Yes, you do. The kitchen clock ticked, the furnace hummed. Outside, a neighbor's dog barked once, then went silent. Are you accusing me of something? His voice stayed level, almost gentle. I'm asking you a question. It sounds like an accusation. She felt something ancient and tired rise up in her chest. Then answer it. He walked to the sink, filled a glass with water he didn't drink, set it down, picked up a dish towel, and folded it into precise thirds. Her name is Rachel, he said finally. She's a paralegal in Marcus's office. The words landed without drama. No shouting, no tears, just truth, delivered quietly in a kitchen that suddenly felt too small. How long? 4 months. 4 months. While she'd been folding his laundry and packing his lunches and sleeping beside him every night, believing they were still building something together. The lawyer was real, he continued, still not looking at her. The estate planning was real, but then she was assigned to our case and we started talking and he stopped, started again. I didn't mean for it to happen. She almost laughed. The oldest line in the oldest story, delivered as if it were somehow original. Are you in love with her? He finally met her eyes. I don't know. That hurt worse than yes would have. Yes would have been definitive. This was limbo. Do you want to leave? I don't know that either. She nodded slowly, picked up her car keys from the counter. Her hands weren't shaking anymore. They'd moved past shaking into something colder, steadier. Where are you going? He asked. I don't know. She walked past him, past 17 years of accumulated life, out into January air that stung her lungs and felt clean in a way the house no longer did. She drove for an hour, no destination, just movement. Ended up at a park where they'd taken Maya when she was small, before the world became complicated. The playground equipment looked different than she remembered. newer, safer, wrapped in that rubbery surface designed to cushion falls. She sat in her car and called her sister. "He's having an affair," she said when Emily answered. "Oh, sweetie, I'm so sorry. I don't know what to do. Come stay with me. Tonight. Right now." She almost said yes. Almost started the car and drove the 3 hours to Emily's house in Boston, where she could collapse into the guest room and let someone else hold the weight for a while. But Maya was home, and despite everything, the girl deserved parents who didn't abandon the wreckage the moment it caught fire. "I can't," she said. "Not yet." "Then what do you need?" "I don't know." She said that phrase a lot now. "I don't know." It was becoming her default response to everything. They talked for 20 more minutes, Emily offering advice she'd heard before, platitudes about time and healing and strength she didn't feel. Eventually, she said goodbye, promised to call tomorrow, and drove home through dark streets where other families were probably eating dinner together, arguing about homework, living all those ordinary disappointments that suddenly seemed enviable. David was still in the kitchen when she returned. He'd cleaned up dinner, a gesture that felt both thoughtful and utterly insufficient. "Maya's upstairs," he said. "I told her you weren't feeling well," she nodded. "We need to talk about what happens next." "Not tonight." "Okay. When?" "I'll let you know." She walked upstairs, past Maya's room where music played softly through the closed door, into their bedroom where everything looked exactly as it had that morning. Same furniture, same curtains, same framed photos on the dresser showing a couple who looked happy because they'd believed they were. She gathered a pillow and blanket and moved to the guest room. David didn't follow. Days passed like that. They orbited each other carefully, speaking only about logistics: who would drive Maya where, what bills needed paying, whether the furnace needed servicing. They slept in separate rooms. They ate separate meals. They became experts in avoidance. Maya knew something was wrong but didn't ask. Teenagers are perceptive that way. They sense the fault lines in their parents' relationship long before those parents are ready to admit them. She thought about leaving, looked at apartments online, calculated finances, imagined what it would feel like to live alone after 17 years of shared space. But she couldn't quite pull the trigger. Not yet. Because despite everything, part of her kept hoping he'd wake up one morning and realize what he was about to lose. Part of her still believed in the story they'd started writing when they were young and stupid and certain they were different from every other couple who'd ever promised forever. She knew that hope was foolish, knew it was the same hope that kept people in situations that were slowly destroying them. But knowing something intellectually and feeling it viscerally were different creatures entirely. The call came on a Saturday morning in February. She was drinking coffee at the kitchen table when David walked in, phone pressed to his ear, face pale. "Yes, okay. I understand. We'll be there as soon as we can." He lowered the phone, slowly. "That was the hospital. There was an accident." Her heart stopped. "Maya?" "No, not Maya, your mom." The coffee cup slipped from her hands. They drove to Connecticut together, because what else could they do? Her mother had collapsed during her morning walk. A stroke, the doctor said. Severe. The prognosis wasn't good. Her father looked smaller than she'd ever seen him, sitting in a waiting room chair that dwarfed his frame, holding her mother's reading glasses because he didn't know what else to do with his hands. David stayed with her through all of it, sat beside her during the endless hours of waiting, brought her terrible hospital coffee, spoke to doctors when she couldn't find words, held her hand when her mother's breathing changed, then stopped. She leaned into him because grief doesn't care about betrayal, because in that moment he was the only person who understood the specific shape of her loss, who'd known her mother as family, not just acquaintance. And for a few hours, she forgot to be angry, forgot everything except the absolute truth that her mother was gone and nothing would ever be the same. They stayed in Connecticut for a week, helping her father sort through logistics that felt both urgent and utterly meaningless. Funeral arrangements, estate paperwork, phone calls to distant relatives. David was useful in all the ways he'd always been useful, organized, thoughtful, taking care of details while she moved through shock like swimming through heavy water. Maya came up on the train, and they were briefly a family again, united by grief, if nothing else. They slept in her childhood home, in separate rooms, maintaining the fiction that everything was fine, even though everyone knew it wasn't. At the funeral, David held her elbow as they walked to the grave. A small gesture, automatic, the kind of thing married people do without thinking. She let him. They drove home separately. She took Maya, he followed in his car. The 3-hour journey passed in near silence, Maya sleeping against the passenger window while she focused on the road and tried not to think about anything beyond the next mile. When they got home, David carried their bags inside and said, "We should talk." "Not tonight. It's been 6 weeks. I just buried my mother." "I know, I'm sorry, but we can't keep living like this." She looked at him. This man she'd chosen, this man she'd built a life with, this man who'd held her hand at her mother's funeral and fucked someone else every Tuesday afternoon. "Fine," she said. "Talk." They sat at the kitchen table while Maya showered upstairs. The same table where they'd eaten 1,000 meals, paid 1,000 bills, had 1,000 small conversations that built the unremarkable infrastructure of married life. "I ended it," he said. "With Rachel, 2 weeks ago." She felt nothing. The information registered without impact, like watching rain through a window. "Okay. I want to try, if you're willing. I want to fix this." "Why?" The question seemed to surprise him. "Because I love you. Because we have a life together. Because I made a terrible mistake, and I'm sorry." "Which part are you sorry for? Doing it or getting caught?" He flinched. "That's not fair." "None of this is fair." They sat in silence. The refrigerator hummed. The house settled around them, all its familiar sounds suddenly unfamiliar. "I don't know if I can do this," she said finally. "I don't know if I want to." "That's fair." "Is it? Is anything about this fair?" He reached across the table. She pulled her hand back. "Don't," she said. They tried anyway. Therapy. Long conversations that went nowhere. Promises and boundaries and all the architecture of attempted reconciliation. He was sorry. She could see that. He was genuinely remorseful, genuinely terrified of losing what they'd built. He did everything right. Complete transparency, couples counseling twice a week, renewed effort in all the small gestures that communicate care. But something in her had fundamentally changed. Some essential trust that once broken couldn't be repaired, no matter how carefully you tried to glue the pieces back together. She'd look at him across the dinner table and see both versions simultaneously. The man she'd loved and the stranger who'd betrayed her. The loving father and the careful liar. The person she'd chosen and the person she never really knew. It was exhausting, holding both truths at once. Maya left for college in August, moved into a dorm room 3 states away, and called home every Sunday, her voice bright with freedom and new experiences. The house felt enormous without her. All that space they'd filled with family life suddenly echoed with absence. They rattled around in it for 6 more months, pretending they still had reasons to stay beyond inertia and shared history and the fear of starting over at 43. Then one morning in February, exactly a year after her mother's death, she woke up and simply knew. Not in a dramatic way, no grand realization, just clarity, arriving quietly like dawn through a window. "I want a divorce," she told him over coffee. He didn't look surprised. Maybe he'd been waiting for it, knowing it was inevitable, even while hoping it wasn't. "Okay," he said, "if that's what you need." "It is." They sat together for a long time, 2 people who'd loved each other once, who'd built something real that had somehow become unsustainable. There was grief in the silence, but also relief. The relief of finally acknowledging what they'd both known for months. "I'm sorry," he said again. "I know." And she did. She believed his remorse was genuine. It just wasn't enough. They divided their lives efficiently, without cruelty. The house sold quickly. The lawyer, a different one this time, handled everything professionally. Maya adjusted, better than expected, or maybe she'd already adjusted long before they made it official. She moved into a small apartment downtown, near the park where she used to take Maya to the playground. Started running again, took up painting, something she'd loved in college and abandoned for more practical pursuits. David moved across town. Started dating someone eventually. Not Rachel, someone new. She heard about it through mutual friends and felt nothing. No rage, no satisfaction, just a distant acknowledgement that he was living his life and she was living hers, and they were no longer responsible for each other's happiness. Sometimes she'd see something funny, and reach for her phone to text him before remembering they didn't do that anymore. Sometimes she'd wake from dreams where they were still together and feel relief when reality reasserted itself. The loss wasn't sharp anymore. It had softened into something manageable, a dull ache that flared occasionally but no longer defined her. 2 years later, she ran into Marcus Reeves at a coffee shop. He looked older, grayer. He clearly recognized her, but seemed uncertain whether to acknowledge it. "Sarah," he said finally, "it's good to see you." "Is it? I'm sorry about everything. I should have referred you to someone else when I realized—" He stopped. "I'm sorry." She looked at him, this man who'd inadvertently facilitated the end of her marriage, and felt something unexpected, curiosity. "Did you know?" she asked. "About them?" "Not at first. By the time I figured it out, it felt too late to intervene." She nodded, ordered her coffee, turned to leave. "Sarah?" She looked back. "For what it's worth, I think you're better off," she smiled slightly. "You don't know me well enough to make that assessment." "Maybe not, but I knew enough to see you weren't happy, long before any of that happened." The observation landed with uncomfortable accuracy, because he was right. The affair hadn't destroyed something healthy. It had merely exposed something that was already crumbling, already built on foundations that were never quite solid enough. David hadn't ruined her life. He just forced her to finally look at it honestly. "Maybe," she said. "Take care, Marcus." She walked out into afternoon sunlight that felt warm against her face, carrying coffee that tasted better than it should. Years can pass inside a single evening, or they can accumulate slowly, one unremarkable day at a time, until you look back and barely recognize the person you used to be. She's 47 now. Maya graduated last spring, landed a job in Seattle, calls twice a week with stories about her new life. David remarried. She sent a card, and she meant the well wishes she wrote inside. Sometimes she wonders what would have happened if she'd never found those receipts, if she'd chosen ignorance over knowledge, if she'd decided the comfortable lie was better than the uncomfortable truth. But those are hypotheticals, and she doesn't live there anymore. She lives in the present, in a life that's smaller than she once imagined, but more authentically hers. She dates occasionally. Nothing serious. She's in no hurry to merge her life with someone else's again. The solitude that once felt like punishment now feels like peace. Love didn't vanish. It just transformed, became something quieter, more measured, more carefully guarded. She's not bitter. Bitterness requires more energy than she's willing to spend on the past. She forgave him, eventually. Not because he earned it, but because holding on to anger was exhausting and she was tired. And she forgave herself for staying too long, for not seeing sooner, for building a life on assumptions that turned out to be false. Some nights, she still thinks about that evening in the hallway, holding a laundry basket, hearing him laugh through a closed door. How such a small moment contained the entire truth if she'd only been ready to see it. But you can't see what you're not prepared to acknowledge. You can't grieve what you're still pretending is alive. Now she knows, and the knowing hurts less than it used to. She left the door unlocked when she moved out, didn't look back, discovered she didn't need to. The life she's building now doesn't require constant glances over her shoulder to compare it against what was. It just exists, quietly, honestly, hers, and somehow, impossibly, that's enough.